Okay. This is our negative response to the state of California requiring labels for food that has been genetically modified. The affirmative states that by not labeling GMOs, we are putting people at risk because A, GMOs are unhealthy, B, GMOs produce negative side effects, and C, GMOs lead to increased herbicide use. The affirmative quotes the American Academy of Environmental Medicine as saying numerous health problems and disorders have increased since GMOs were first introduced back in 1996. He also quotes the Institute for Responsible Technology as showing evidence of GMO-related early death and cancer in animals. I find these examples highly suspect as the American Academy of Environmental Medicine is an alternative medicine group that routinely rallies against GMOs and advances the false belief that vaccines are dangerous as well. Also, the Institute for Responsible Technology was described in a 2014 Forbes article as being the personal website for Jeffrey Smith, an anti-GMO crusader who often cites his own self-published book as evidence for his views. Forbes magazine goes on to reference the Journal of Animal Science, in which a science geneticist at UC Davis published a study that she had conducted that basically reviewed the health of livestock over the last 29 years. According to Forbes, the fetal data that represented more than 100 billion animals, and covering the period before '96 when animal feed was 100% non-GMO, and after its introduction when it jumped to over 90%. There was no indication of any unusual trends in the health of the animals since 1996, and it can reasonably say that there is zero extraordinary impact. Every major international science body in the world has reviewed multiple independent studies, in some cases numbered in the hundreds, and coming to the consensus conclusion that GMO crops are safe or safer than conventional or organic foods. Now, regarding the claim that GMOs produce negative side effects, an Italian study that researched the health effects of GMOs over the last 10 years found that there is no scientific evidence of toxic or allergenic effects. During the digestion process, the proteins generally undergo degradation that leads to the loss of activity, and the consumption of transgenic proteins contained in the GE crop does not result in any detectable systemic uptake, and that it's not detectable in animal-derived products as well. So they concluded that the scientific research conducted so far has not detected any significant hazard directly connected with the use of the genetically modified crops. GMOs also undergo rigorous safety testing. According to the World Health Organization, GM foods currently available on the international market have passed safety assessments and are not likely to present risk for human health. In addition, no effects on human health have been shown as a result of the consumption of such foods by the general population in the countries where they have been approved. And regarding the claim that GMOs lead to increased herbicide use, this is not true according to a 2011 study on the impact of GM crops on biodiversity that states that by increasing yields, decreasing insecticide use, increasing use of more environmentally friendly herbicides, and facilitating adoption of conservation tillage, GE crops have contributed to increasing agricultural sustainability. The affirmative then extends its attack on GMOs to include social concerns, such as no current policies are in place because the government ignores the health risk, and that the policies that do exist don't specifically target GMOs. Well, this is not true, as the FDA has had a policy regarding GMOs or food that derives from biotechnology since 1992. As stated on organicaglaw.com, the name of a bioengineered food must be changed only if it is significantly different from its traditional counterpart. This law has existed since the early 90s, and contrary to the affirmative's assertion, it doesn't specifically target GMOs. The affirmative states also that by having policies in place, people will be aware of what they eat, and that due to religious or ethical concerns, they can choose to avoid it. And also that other countries have already implemented labels on GMOs. Well, if people want to avoid eating GMOs for ethical or religious concerns, the current labeling system is sufficient. According to a 2014 Colorado State University research paper, as I stated previously, the FDA has required labeling of GM foods only if the food has a nutritional or food safety property that is significantly different from what consumers would expect of that food. Also in 2001, the FDA established voluntary labeling, so companies can label their food as USDA organic for those consumers with ethical or religious concerns. The standards for USDA organic exclude genetic engineering, so their products do not contain GM ingredients. And this is a voluntary labeling as opposed to mandatory labeling, which would incur a higher cost to the consumer. Mandatory labeling requirements could include identification of each genetic ingredient, its level of content in the product, and most require further regulatory interventions, including monitoring and enforcement. and these all obviously the cost ends up getting shifted over to the consumer. Also, the affirmative references the California Right to Know Genetically Engineered Food Act, saying companies change their labeling all the time. But this is not a label saying the product now comes in 3 flavors or now contains vitamin C. You know, the term genetically modified has a negative connotation for a lot of people. And by slapping a label on a product clearly identifying the difference in ingredients from all the other non-labeled food sparks suspicion in the consumer. A label falsely implies that GMOs are not safe to consume. Take, for example, the case of GMOs in Western Europe. The European Union made labeling of GMOs mandatory in 1997, and according to an article in Scientific American, by 1999, to avoid labels that might drive customers away, most major European retailers had removed genetically modified ingredients from products bearing their brand. Major food producers such as Nestle followed suit. Today, it is virtually impossible to find GMOs in European supermarkets. A 2003 study on whether mandatory labeling laws really provide consumer choice stated, basically with mandatory labeling, it's easy for the anti-HMO advocates to put negative pressure and launch a negative campaign against the processing firms. They support mandatory labeling for the sake of consumer choice, knowing full well that this policy will lead to no choice in practice. So as you can see, the fear of the safety risks are unfounded. The current labeling law is sufficient, and proposed mandatory labeling will cause unfair harm to GMO producers.